Hello, Accelerated Math 6-7 students. This is Module 8, and we are starting Lesson 7. And Lesson 7 is called Multiplication and Division of Rational Numbers. Okay? And our goal for today is we are going to practice the rules and tools for multiplying and dividing rational numbers. The question that I want you to be thinking about is, what is your favorite tool when you are multiplying or dividing rational numbers, and explain why. Okay, so things to remember. Multiplication, whether it's with integers or rational numbers, can be remembered as repeated addition. And so what we need to remember about that is that sometimes repeated addition means that you take one number and you repeat it the number of times that it's being multiplied. So in this instance, what we're saying that this number right here is the numerical value, and this number right here is the number of groups. Now, I know in the other lessons that I told you that it was the other way around, but what you have to remember about that is that multiplication is commutative, so the order doesn't matter as long as you have one of each. All right, so this one is saying that I have negative 2.5 4 times. And because I'm remembering that multiplication is repeated addition, then I can very easily stretch this out and figure out what the answer is. So we have negative 2.5 plus negative 2.5 plus negative 2.5 plus negative 2.5. And what you can remember is we could draw that on a number line very easily. So you're going to go to the left 2.5, put an arrow, to the left 2.5, put an arrow, to the left 2.5, put an arrow, to the left 2.5, put an arrow. All right, and so if we do that, we're basically saying that we have moving to the left, so here's 0, 1, 2.5 is here, right? So we have negative 2.5, which would be right there, right? And then we go, there's our half, and then 1, 2. So this is 3, 4, 5, so this would be negative 5, right? So then we have another arrow, and then we have to go 2.5 to the left, so 1, 2.5 would be 3, right? So we go to here. So now we're at negative 7.5, right? And then the half is right there, so that would be 8. And then we have 9, 10, and we'd go here, and we end up at negative 10 because we did it 4 times. So our answer to that problem is negative 10. Okay, now, are we going to want to have to draw a number line every time we do these? No. So this is something else that I want to show you. If you have a negative numerical value number and it happens 4 times, what does your answer end up being? Negative. So we could come up with a rule that says a negative, because that's the numerical value, right? The numerical value is negative. So a negative times a positive, because the number of groups is positive, look at it, that's a positive, is a negative. So that means that if you take a negative number times a positive number, you're going to get a negative number as the answer. And that's the rule that I want you to remember. So a negative times a positive gives you a negative. Okay. And so we need to remember that this works because if you're adding negatives every single time, you don't have any positives, so there's no way that the answer could be positive because you're repeated addition, you're repeatedly adding negative 2.5 plus negative 2.5 plus negative 2.5 plus negative 2.5 4 times. And so we know that a negative times a positive gives us a negative answer. Okay, good. All right, so now the question is, does it work for division? Well, I'm pretty sure that it does work for division, so let's take a look at it. Rational number division, remember that this number, this time, funny chance to do this, is that this is the number, the amount that you start with, and this is the amount that you're dividing. So negative 10 goes in the house. And then we need to remember that division also can be represented by repeated subtraction. And so the way that we think about this is we start with negative 10 negatives, and we're taking away 2.5 negatives at a time. And so basically, we learned earlier on in our life that subtraction is the same as adding the opposite. So this is really plus 2.5 because the opposite of negative 2.5 is 2.5. So here we have it again, plus the opposite of negative 2.5 is 2.5. Plus, change that to plus again, the opposite of negative 2.5 is 2.5. Subtraction is the opposite of adding the opposite, which is 2.5. So as you can see, we're applying our subtraction rule, which makes it very easy because now we just say to ourselves, we start out with negative 10 and we need to add 2.5 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So let's see what happens. So if I have negative 10 right here and I'm adding 2.5 to it, then what I have to recognize is that I'm actually getting this number smaller, right? Or actually it's becoming bigger because this is a tiny number because it's negative. But you just basically have to find the difference between the two. So if you think about it like on a number line, if you're at negative 10, and then let's do it over here with a number line because I really don't want you guys to get confused. Okay, so we're at negative 10. Pretend I started at 0 for time. Okay, started at 0, and now I'm at negative 10. Now it's saying that I'm going to add 2.5 to it. So I'm going to go 1, 2 and a half. So my arrow goes to right here. And because my arrow is right here, then that means that I would end up at negative 7.5, right? And then from there, so there's the half, and then I add 2 onto that, right? So that would become negative 6, negative 5, negative 4. So this is now negative 4, so that's my second time doing it, right? And now I'm supposed to add, so I've done this one, I've done this one. Now I need to add this one, so I'm going to say, okay, plus 2.5 again, so 1, 2 and a half. So my arrow would go to right here. So this is negative 3, negative 2, and this must be negative 2.5. So far, so good. So then that would be negative 1. And then we have to get to 0. So that would be 2 and a half negative. So negative 3, negative 2. This one's negative 1. And then in half of that. And then you finally get to 0. And 0 can't be negative. So as you can see, if you add 2.5 to negative 10 4 times, you get back to 0, which was our goal. Okay? And so what we learned by this one is a negative number, 10 was negative, a negative number divided by, yes, it's me, Hensley. Good morning. A negative 10 divided by, good morning. I'm just checking the building, that's all. Okay, thanks. All right. Okay, sorry for that interruption. A negative divided by a positive gives us a, how many times did we actually divide it? 1, 2, 3, 4. Gives us a positive. A negative divided by a positive gives us a negative. Sorry, I'm really jumbled now because I'm confused as to what we did. Oh, I remember. It has to be a negative because we took them away. We're taking them away. So let's say that again. Sorry for the confusion. A negative divided by a positive gives us a negative answer. So the answer to this problem, negative 10 divided by 2.5, is actually a negative 4. And the reason why is because we have to take them away, and we took them away 4 times. So the answer would be negative 4. All right? Okay, now that I've showed you that and maybe confused you, I apologize for confusing you. The whole point of me trying to show you it was because we were coming up with rules to remember. And this rule taught us that a negative times a positive gives us a negative. So a negative divided by a positive gives us a negative. And so now I'm going to give you a different tool that you might all just go, okay, crazy lady, why did you do all of that other stuff? Well, the reason I did all of that other stuff is because, as you know, in this math, we have to prove it. So we just proved it. But now that we've proven it, now we can trust, because we proved it, that we can use a tool to help us. And the tool that I want you to look at for this one is there's this thing called a helpful triangle. This helpful triangle has nothing to do with geometry. It's just used as a graphic organizer to collect your thoughts. And when you use the helpful triangle, there is a very specific way that you have to use it every single time, and you can't change it. And what you have to do is you need to put a positive sign in the top of your triangle always. Always has to be positive. And then in the bottom corners, you have to put negative signs, okay? And this is how it's going to help you. We just proved that a positive times a positive is a positive. You've been proving that since you were like in second grade. A positive number times another positive number is going to give you a positive number as the answer. So 2 times 5 equals 10, okay? The second thing that we need to talk about is it says a negative times a negative is a positive. Okay, well, this is where the helpful triangle comes in, and so this is what you do. You take a negative, cover it up with your finger, times a negative, and what is left showing? Positive. So your answer is positive. How cool is that? Okay, so then what if you're dividing? You have a negative number divided by a negative number, and your answer is positive. Okay, so now let's try this next one. A negative times a positive is a negative. We'll try it. A negative times a positive, what's showing? Negative. Okay, try it the other one. A negative times a positive is a negative. Okay, how about dividing? A negative divided by a positive gives you a negative. A negative divided by a positive gives you a negative. Okay, and so it works for multiplication or division. This triangle cannot, you need to write this down, cannot be used for adding and subtracting. Only multiplying and dividing is when you use the triangle. Okay, the last one, a positive times a negative gives you a negative. This is the one we were proving up above. So a positive times a negative gives us a negative answer. A positive times a negative gives us a negative answer. A positive divided by a negative gives us a negative answer. Okay, and so the triangle can be a very, very helpful tool just for you to cover up the signs that you have and see what sign you're going to come up with. All right, so that's a way to help you. All right, the last thing that I want to talk about with this is one more thing, and it's the helpful properties. The properties that allow you to change the order, grouping, or quantities make the problem easier to manage. And so what we're talking about with this is you know about the commutative property. That's the one where you're allowed to change the order. You know about the associative property, which allows you to change what you group. And then the quantities problem is the distributive property. And so very quickly, if we keep that in mind, then this problem will not be so gross, okay? And so what I would like to do is you need to use order of operations, and we also need to keep in mind, so remember order of operations, that's the first thing. And then the second one that I want you to think about is you also need to remember that division, can't see it, is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. Okay, you need to remember those two rules when we're going to try this very large problem right here. Okay, so remember order of operations, and then remember that division is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. And now we're going to try this problem and see what we can do. Okay, so we have 12, and we're dividing 12 by a negative 2/3. So the first thing that I want you to remember is if we take 12 and we divide it by 1, we have not changed the value of the number because 12 divided by 1 is still 12. Then I'm going to remember that division is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal means that the numerator becomes the denominator and the denominator becomes the numerator, and you have to keep the sign in there. So we're going to multiply this by 3 halves. Okay, so that's not bad because when we do that, we can see that 12 times 3 gives us 36, right? And 1 times 2 is 2, but then I also have to remember my rule of we have a positive multiplied by a negative, so there's my helpful triangle, a positive multiplied by a negative, so my answer has to be negative, so this is going to be negative. And then we also know that 36 divided by 2 is 18, so we now have this is negative 18. That wasn't so bad, right? Okay, and now we just bring down everything that we have to do still. So we still have to multiply that by 2, then we have to divide that by a negative 9, then we have to multiply that by a negative 5, and then we have to divide that by 1/2. Okay, so that's where we're at in that one. I'm going to change the color again so you can see what we're doing. All right, so the next step is to take a negative times a positive. A negative times a positive gives me a negative answer. So I know that this is a negative. 18 times 2 is 36. So we're right back to 36. That's crazy. Then we're going to divide it by a negative 9. And then we are going to multiply that by a negative 5. And then we're going to divide that by 2. And so now the next thing that I see that we need to do is we are going to take a negative divided by a negative. Oh, okay. Well, that's not so horrible, right? A negative divided by a negative. So a negative divided by a negative, our answer is going to be positive. And what is 36 divided by 9? 36 divided by 9 is 4. And it has to be positive because we did a negative divided by a negative, cover them both up, and you get left with a positive. And then we bring down what we have to do. So this is a negative 5. And then we divide that by 1/2. Okay? So that's not so horrible. So now we take a positive times a negative. A positive times a negative. So my answer has to be negative. And so I take 4 times 5, and I get negative 20. And then I have to divide that by 1/2. And then we remember the rule that division is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to change it to that, and the reciprocal of 1/2 is 2 over 1, and so I have negative 20 over 1, and now I can just multiply straight across. A negative times a positive is a negative, so I know my answer is negative, so 20 times 2 is 40 divided by 1, and I know that 40 divided by 1 is 40, but I have a negative and a positive, so my answer is going to be a negative 40. Okay? Now, was that so awful? Look at how long we started with, this big, gigantic, long thing, and then look at how far down it took us to get there. But it wasn't horrible because we remembered order of operations, and we remembered that division is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, and we came up with the right answer. Okay? All right, kiddos, that's what I have for you today. Let's look at our goal one more time really quickly. Okay? Our goal was today we are going to practice the rules and tools for multiplying and dividing rational numbers, which we did. Helpful triangle, really, really, really helpful. What is your favorite tool when multiplying or dividing rational numbers? The only time you can use this favorite tool is with multiplying and dividing. When can you use it? Multiplying, dividing. When can you use it? Multiplying and dividing. And that tool is the helpful triangle. And don't forget, it has to be drawn this way every single time. Positive at the top, 2 negatives at the bottom if you're going to use the helpful triangle. All right, kiddos. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.